My name is Madison Cole, 24 years old, born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. 4 years of studying software engineering passed in a blur of relentless effort, countless sleepless nights spent writing code, long shifts at part-time jobs just to cover tuition, and moments where I had to whisper to myself not to give up, even when loneliness pressed hard on the difficult path I chose. And then, the day I had dreamed of for so long finally arrived, graduation day. It should have been the perfect moment, with my family seated in the front row, waving proudly, their faces glowing with joy. Instead, all I received that morning was a short message from my father. "We're not coming. Your sister, Chloe, is the one who deserves to be at the center today." In that moment, I forced a smile as I walked across the stage, but inside I was breaking apart, knowing I had never been enough to earn their recognition. But before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt abandoned by your own family like that? And where are you listening from right now, so I know I am not completely alone? I remember it so clearly. From the time I was little, I learned how to live in the shadow of my sister. Chloe is 2 years older than me, and from the moment I became aware of the world around me, every gaze in our home was fixed on her. If she smiled, the whole family lit up. If she cried, everyone rushed to comfort her. And what about me? I was the child who learned to sit quietly in the corner, observing, silently gathering the broken scraps of affection left behind after Chloe had already taken her fill. That feeling seeped deeper and deeper into me, making me believe that love in my family was a limited resource, and my share would always be less. Birthdays were always the clearest proof. Chloe's birthdays were grand celebrations at fancy restaurants, filled with balloons, multi-tiered cakes, and dozens of relatives and friends gathered to cheer for her. I still remember her 10th birthday when my parents even hired a small band. She wore a pink princess dress and stepped onto the stage under glittering lights. I was 8 then, standing in the crowd clapping along, but no one noticed me. And my birthdays? Just a small cake bought from the nearby bakery, a few candles stuck in hastily, sometimes without my father even there because he was busy taking Chloe to her piano lessons. I used to wonder if I wasn't worthy of blowing out candles while surrounded by a chorus of birthday wishes. But little by little, I learned to stay silent. School was no different. I was the child who loved studying, who adored solving math problems, who could sit for hours in front of an old computer tinkering with code. I earned a full scholarship, something many of my peers only dreamed of. Yet when I brought the scholarship letter home, my father only said, "Good, but Chloe is the one with real artistic talent. You're just book smart." My mother added, "You should learn to be graceful like your sister, not always buried in that computer." Hearing those words, I felt a lump in my throat. Instead of pride, my parents treated my achievements as something dry and unworthy of celebration. Family gatherings were always a nightmare. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone circled around Chloe. "You played that piece beautifully. Your daughter is truly the pride of the family. Chloe, you'll be a great artist one day." And me? At best, I got a casual, "You're still doing okay in school, right?" A question that didn't even need an answer. In their eyes, I was just the shadow that existed to highlight my sister's brilliance. I remember sitting in the crowded living room, listening to Chloe's name being spoken over and over, until it felt like my own name had never existed. There is one memory etched so deeply that I can never forget it. When I was 16, my school held a science competition, and my small programming project won first prize statewide. I carried that trophy home, my heart racing, hoping for a hug from my parents. But when I walked through the door, they were busy preparing for Chloe's piano recital. I lifted the trophy high, my face glowing. My father glanced at it briefly and nodded. "Yeah, good." My mother hurriedly adjusted the straps on Chloe's dress and told me, "Leave it there, we'll talk later tonight." That evening, the whole family went out to celebrate Chloe's success. My trophy, meanwhile, sat alone on the shelf, slowly gathering dust as the years passed. That favoritism wasn't just in the words of praise, it showed in every small decision. When I wanted to take an advanced computer class, My parents said it wasn't necessary because machines are for men. But when Chloe wanted to take an expensive art class, they immediately found the money no matter what it took. When I needed a laptop for school, they bought me an old secondhand one. Chloe, on the other hand, was gifted a brand new piano that gleamed like a treasure. No one ever asked me, "What do you need?" All I ever received were endless comparisons. The greatest pain wasn't the lack of material things, but the absence of recognition. I grew up with that wound, silent but unrelenting. I learned how to endure, how not to expect, how to stand quietly behind others. I became the easy child, the one who caused no trouble, the one who needed little care. But inside me, every moment of being forgotten added another layer of resentment. I asked myself over and over, was I truly invisible, or did they choose not to see me? Graduation day arrived like the milestone I had been waiting for through all those years. From early morning, the campus was filled with students in deep blue gowns, square caps tossed into the wind, and the cheerful laughter of thousands of graduates with their families. The stage was decorated with fresh flowers, music filled the air, and camera flashes went off endlessly. The atmosphere was both festive and solemn, yet for me, it was also filled with emptiness. When my name was called, the announcer's voice rang out, "Madison Cole, graduating with honors in software engineering." Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, professors nodded, friends clapped. But the place I longed for most, the seats reserved for family, remained cold and empty. I walked onto the stage, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the gown tightly as I tried to keep my legs from trembling. The lights shone down, thousands of people applauded, but each clap echoed as if from a distant world. I looked out into the audience, where other students were smiling in their parents' arms, being handed flowers, embraced tightly. Some mothers wiped tears of joy, some fathers held their heads high with pride. When I looked toward my own seats, all I saw was silence and emptiness. My chest tightened, as though an invisible hand was squeezing my heart. In that moment, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from my father. "Don't be upset, we're busy at Chloe's piano performance." My hand went cold as I gripped the phone. Don't be upset. They always said that. I learned not to be upset when they forgot my birthdays. I learned not to be upset when my scholarship was ignored. And now, they wanted me not to be upset when they abandoned me on the most important day of my life, just to cheer for Chloe once again. I clenched my teeth, lifted my chin, and forced back the tears that threatened to spill in front of so many eyes. I swallowed every drop of pain, holding my smile steady. As the camera swept across me, I tilted my head and smiled as if nothing had happened. I gripped the diploma the professor placed in my hand, bowed, and stepped off the stage, my heart so hollow that every step felt like I was walking on air. As I stepped off the stage, friends rushed over, congratulating me, hugging me, inviting me to take pictures. I stood in the middle of that circle, the smile still fixed on my face, but inside my heart felt lost. I looked around and saw the parents of my classmates beaming with pride, handing their children flowers, embracing them, whispering words of love. I heard over and over the phrase, "We are so proud of you," like a painful chorus echoing around me. I longed to hear those words, but deep down I knew they would never come from my own parents. A moment later, I noticed one of my classmates, Emily, spreading her arms wide as her mother came toward her, kissed her on the forehead, and placed a large bouquet of sunflowers into her hands. Emily's face lit up, her eyes glowing as though the whole world was watching her. I smiled and congratulated her, but as I turned away, I caught sight of my own reflection in the glass wall of the hall. A girl in a deep blue gown, clutching her diploma tightly, yet standing utterly alone in a sea of happiness. At that moment, a profound sadness mixed with something like awakening crept into me. I realized I had spent my entire life waiting for just one proud glance from my parents. I had pushed myself to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, to prove that I was worthy too. But what was the result? No matter what I achieved, they always chose Chloe. No matter how high I climbed, they dismissed me. Even when I stood on the stage of victory, they abandoned me to go listen to Chloe play one more song. I sat down in my seat, staring at the diploma in my hands, and suddenly it felt both heavy and light. Heavy because it was the result of countless efforts, yet light because it could never make my parents turn their eyes toward me. A cold emptiness spread slowly through my chest. I had been fooling myself into believing that one day they would acknowledge me, but today, the truth stood bare: they never would. When the graduation ceremony ended, everyone left hand in hand with their families, laughter echoing all around. I quietly walked back to my small apartment in Boston. I sat down on the familiar wooden chair by the window, still clutching the diploma like a token that was both sweet and bitter. And then, I wanted to share with you a secret I had never revealed to anyone in my family. Because if they knew, I am certain they would dismiss it, or worse, try to take it away from me. For the past 2 years, beyond my studies in the lecture halls, I had been throwing myself into another journey, a path no one in my family ever imagined I could walk. I began working at a small startup in the field of artificial intelligence. At first, I was just an intern, typing lines of code, testing datasets, running experiments. But I quickly proved my ability, and within 6 months, I became one of the most trusted young engineers there. Those sleepless nights in my dorm room, the glow of the screen reflecting on my tired face, were also the nights I felt deep inside that I was building something far greater than grades or a diploma. That startup, after a long and grueling journey, secured a major investment from a venture capital fund. Because of my key contributions to the core project, I was given the chance to own equity. When the news of the successful funding round broke, my small stakes suddenly turned into a fortune I had never even dared to dream of. Quietly, I sold part of it, kept the rest, and the money I earned far exceeded anything a recent graduate could imagine. With that money, I made a decision that even I hadn't expected. I bought a $3 million lakefront home in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. Why Lake Tahoe? Because it was the only place that had ever given me a sense of peace. I still remember being 16, the one and only time my parents took me on a family vacation, and even then the trip quickly became another stage for Chloe to shine. But when I wandered alone along the lake shore, watching the rippling water under the sunset, I felt, for the first time, that there was a place where I wasn't compared, where I wasn't cast aside. I filled my lungs with the crisp mountain air, and in that fleeting moment I dreamed, if only this place could be mine. I never imagined that a few years later, that dream would come true. The house was designed with massive glass walls looking directly out over the blue lake, a wide wooden deck large enough to host a small gathering, and a stone fireplace where I could curl up with a book on winter nights. It wasn't just a property, it was a sanctuary, my secret haven. There, I could let go of the comparisons, the cold stares, the dismissive words. There, I found the stillness that a lifetime in my family had never given me. I never told my parents or Chloe about this house. I knew too well that if they found out, they wouldn't see it as the result of my hard work, but as a prize to be taken. They would say I should know how to share, that Chloe deserved to live in a place like this, or that I shouldn't be showing off. They would find any reason to twist my achievement into a burden I was expected to hand over. That's why I kept it hidden. To them, I was still just the daughter renting a tiny apartment in Boston, struggling with lines of code. The truth, though, was mine alone. I had built an entire world of my own, one they could never touch. I set the diploma on the table beside the phone that still glowed with my father's cold message. I stared at it for a long time, as if etching that moment into memory to remember that I had been abandoned even when I was most deserving of love and recognition. But instead of sinking into tears, my mind turned toward a plan. I didn't want to scream to force them to see me. I wanted them to witness it for themselves. I wanted them to realize that while they turned their backs, I was capable of building a world they could never have imagined. The thought of the lake house appeared in my mind, shining as clearly as moonlight on the water. For the past 2 years, I had kept that secret to myself, treating it as my personal refuge. But now, I knew it would become the stage for the truth. I would host a graduation celebration not in the tiny apartment in Boston, but in Lake Tahoe, at the very $3 million home I had bought with my own hands. And unlike every time before, I would not hide it from my family. I would invite them all. I carefully wrote out the guest list. First were the people who had truly walked beside me. My professors at the university, those who believed in me and gave me the chance to prove myself. My closest friends, the ones who quietly shared my pain when I was ignored by my family. My colleagues at the startup, those who saw me working through sleepless nights and knew I was more than just a shadow. I wanted them there to share in my joy, to see that their support and care had never been in vain. But most importantly, I added the entire extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who, for years, had praised Chloe at every gathering and never once acknowledged my accomplishments. I still remembered sitting in crowded living rooms, listening to them repeat again and again. Chloe is so talented. She's the pride of the whole family. They had grown accustomed to looking at me with faded eyes, treating me as an afterthought, invisible beside her glow. This time, I wanted them to see with their own eyes that the truth was nothing like the picture they had painted all these years. I opened my laptop and designed the electronic invitation. I chose an elegant font, with the background image showing the wooden deck of the lake house, golden sunlight reflecting on the deep blue water. In the invitation, I wrote a single short but weighty line. "Thank you for once seeing me. Now I want to invite you to witness who I truly am." I read those words over and over, feeling a tremor in my chest. It wasn't a loud challenge, but a quiet declaration. Anyone who read it would understand that this was the first time I stood up and refused to accept being the faded shadow. When I pressed send, my heart pounded as if I had stepped into a battle. I imagined the reactions of my relatives when they received the invitation. Perhaps they would be surprised, even confused. Madison? Inviting us? She never does anything grand. Perhaps my parents would frown. What is she up to? How dare she organize something without telling us first? But it was exactly those reactions that steeled my resolve. Because this gathering was not about asking for their recognition, it was about leaving them with no way to deny it. In the days that followed, I poured all my time into preparations. I called an event service in Lake Tahoe, arranged flowers and lighting, and hired a band to play soft melodies by the water. I wanted the gathering to be not just elegant but deeply moving, so that every detail would serve as a response to all the years of being overlooked. I imagined the guests walking in, seeing the house glowing under the sunset, hearing the waves lapping against the rocky shore, and realizing, this place belongs to me. Madison Cole, the daughter they once thought had nothing worth remembering. I couldn't help feeling nervous. Many times I sat alone and asked myself, am I being too bold? Will they even come? Will this turn into a joke? But then I remembered the lonely look in my own eyes at graduation, remembered my father's message. Don't be upset. And I knew, if I didn't do this now, I would forever be buried in the shadows. I had to step into the light, in my own way. The night before departure, I sat in my apartment, staring at the suitcase already packed. On the table lay my diploma, and on the laptop screen the invitation still open. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled. This wasn't just a party, this was a declaration. For the first time in my life, I was no longer waiting for someone to hand me recognition. I would build the stage myself and let the whole world, especially my family, witness it. The rented car carried me along the winding mountain road toward Lake Tahoe as the sun dipped low on the horizon. The last light of day stretched across the water, gilding the vast lake in shimmering gold. My lake house appeared nestled among the pines, its gray roof blending into the landscape while the wide wooden deck and glowing glass walls caught the sunset, standing out like a jewel. I stepped out, my heart racing, filled with both nerves and anticipation. Weeks of preparation were about to be put to the test. As the first guests arrived, the warm golden lights illuminated the house, reflecting off the still surface of the lake. The gentle notes of a violin floated through the air from the small band I had hired, blending with the soft rhythm of waves against the rocky shore. The scene left more than a few people in awe. My mentor, Professor Raymond, stepped out of his car, shook his head slightly, and said, "Madison, this is yours." I can hardly believe it. I smiled and replied, "Yes, Professor. This is my home. In his eyes, I saw the pride I had longed to see in my parents. Groups of friends soon arrived, laughing and talking, taking photos on the deck, raising their glasses in celebration. They looked around, marveling at each detail: the warm stone fireplace, the elegant leather sofas, the abstract paintings lining the hallway. Every corner reminded me of countless sleepless nights, every dollar I saved, all the effort that turned a dream into reality. Then came the neighbors from around the lake, people I had quietly spoken with during a few earlier visits. They couldn't hide their surprise when they learned that I, a young woman fresh out of college, was the owner of this house. An elderly woman with silver hair sat near the deck, smiling kindly. "You are so brave and talented, my dear. Very few your age could accomplish something like this." Her words soothed my heart, filling the space where the recognition from my own blood had always been absent. And then, one by one, the cars carrying my relatives began to arrive. I stood behind the curtain, watching. Familiar faces stepped out, each of them showing clear signs of discomfort. I overheard whispers. "My goodness, I thought Chloe was the successful one. Turns out," or "How could Madison possibly afford a place like this?" Shock, doubt, even a hint of envy flickered in their eyes. But in that moment, I knew my plan had already reached its purpose: to make them question, to make them reflect on the years they had spent overlooking me. When everything had settled, I stepped forward. The midnight blue gown hugged my figure, simple yet elegant. The golden light spilled across my loose hair, and my reflection shimmered in the glass wall behind me. I smiled, standing in the center of the wide wooden deck, looking out at the familiar faces turned toward me. For a brief moment, the air grew still, broken only by the wind rustling through the pines. "Welcome to my home," I said, my voice steady yet gentle. The words carried through the crowd, leaving them frozen. I saw Aunt Linda's eyes widen, Uncle George's brows furrow, and the stunned looks of my cousins. They had never imagined hearing me say such a thing, because in their memory, Madison Cole was nothing more than the shadow standing quietly behind Chloe. I took another step forward, microphone in hand, and continued. "Someone once told me that I didn't deserve to shine. That my place was only in the background, so others could take the stage. But tonight, I want to share this light with those who have truly valued me, those who saw me, even when my own family did not." My words fell like pebbles into the lake, rippling outward in a silence that spread through the crowd. I looked around and saw friends nodding, professors smiling, while my relatives, the ones who had spent years praising only Chloe, shifted uneasily, unsure how to meet my eyes. That silence, to me, was worth more than any hollow compliment. And then, the sound of applause broke out. At first, it was only from Professor Raymond, then from my closest friends, and soon it spread through the entire crowd. The clapping grew louder and louder, echoing across the deck, drowning out the heavy silence. I heard cheers, my name being called, saw the shining eyes of those who had always believed in me. In that moment, warmth surged through my body. For the first time, I stood in the center of a crowd and was recognized not as Chloe's little sister, but as myself, Madison Cole. As the music swelled and glasses were raised in celebration, the atmosphere grew lively. Yet, even in the joy, I caught a few averted gazes, a few faces flushed with embarrassment. My parents hadn't come, but the presence of the extended family was enough to carry the message. I didn't need to scream for recognition, I only had to show them. And when the truth stood plainly before their eyes, their silence was the sharpest answer of all. The party by the lake carried on with laughter and music. The violin blended with cheerful voices, golden light shimmered across the water, and glasses of wine clinked together in warmth. I moved among the groups of guests, smiling as friends recalled memories from school, bowing in gratitude as professors congratulated me. Even receiving tight embraces from neighbors who had only ever exchanged brief greetings before. Yet beneath it all, my phone buzzed again and again in my pocket, each vibration making my heart tighten. I slipped it out for a quick glance. Dozens of missed calls, all from my father, my mother, and Chloe. At first, I felt a flicker of confusion. A part of me still longed for their approval, still hoped maybe they were calling to offer belated congratulations. But then a message appeared on the screen, pulling me back to reality. "What are you doing? Why are you showing off in front of the relatives? You're embarrassing us." The tone was no different from all the years before, not concern, but reproach. I stared at the glaring screen in my hand, then let out a faint, bitter laugh. I set the phone face down on the table, letting it buzz again and again without picking up. Meanwhile, I could hear the whispers among my relatives. Across the deck, Aunt Linda murmured to Uncle George, "Why aren't her parents here? If it were Chloe, they'd be in the front row, raising their glasses proudly." Uncle George lowered his voice. "Maybe they can't handle Madison's success. They've always believed Chloe was the only one meant to shine." The hushed words rippled through the crowd, everyone wondering why the people who should have been the proudest were nowhere to be seen. I didn't answer, only smiled when someone asked, as if my parents' absence no longer bothered me. But deep inside, a heavy contradiction stirred. I hurt because they were still the same, clinging to their old ways. Yet at the same time, I felt an odd sense of freedom. Their silence for the first time didn't make me feel worthless. Instead, it proved that I had stepped beyond their control. In the middle of the party, a friend handed me her phone and whispered, "Did you see what Chloe just posted on her story?" I took it and glanced at the screen. Sure enough, on Instagram, Chloe had written, "Some people only know how to show off. Real value doesn't need to be displayed." Beneath her words was a picture of her piano under stage lights, as if reminding the world that she was still the center of attention. I let out a quiet laugh, not from amusement, but from pity. Chloe could have the lights, the applause, the stage, but she had never once possessed what I held at that moment. The genuine respect of people who truly saw me. I set the phone back on the table and returned to the group of guests laughing nearby, raising my glass with theirs. I didn't need to explain, didn't need to argue. My silence was the only answer required. As I smiled brightly with friends, as I danced spontaneously on the wooden deck with a few colleagues, I caught the looks from my relatives, astonished, uneasy, and slowly realizing the truth they had long chosen to ignore. The phone kept buzzing, but I no longer cared. Messages flashed across the screen and vanished. "Do you think you're better than us? You're bringing shame on the family. You should know your place and step aside for your sister." Each one only reinforced what I already knew. They had never understood me, never truly seen me. And instead of hurting me further, this time, it felt like a reminder that I was finally on the right path. As small fireworks lit up the sky from the lakeshore, their colors rippling across the shimmering water, the crowd clapped and cheered. I lifted my head toward the brilliant sky, my heart light, and my family, the ones who had always been loud, always the center of every gathering, were now nothing more than an angry silence somewhere far away. They weren't present, they couldn't control me, they couldn't dim my light. Their absence itself became a space I could finally fill with laughter and freedom. That night, after the guests had drifted away, I sat alone on the wooden deck with a glass of wine in my hand. The lake was still, the cold breeze brushed softly against my face. My phone lay silent on the table, its screen full of missed calls and dozens of unread messages. But I didn't open it. I left it there, a quiet witness to my choice. I chose silence, I chose joy, I chose the people who truly valued me. My family could be angry, they could stay silent, but for the first time in my life, I no longer felt small beneath that silence. A week after the lake house celebration, when I had returned to Boston and thrown myself back into work and new plans, the doorbell to my small apartment rang insistently. I opened the door, and there they were, my parents and Chloe. My father stood with his hands on his hips, his face red with rage. My mother pressed her lips into a hard line, her eyes sharp with reproach. Chloe, dressed in a fashionable gown, crossed her arms with the same self-assurance she wore on stage, as if she were still waiting for applause. The tension was so thick I felt as if the narrow hallway itself could no longer hold enough air to breathe. My father stormed in without waiting for an invitation, his voice sharp and heavy. "Do you even know what you've done? You've humiliated us in front of the family. Why didn't you say anything beforehand? Why did you throw such a spectacle without telling us? I looked at him and saw it clearly more fury than concern. To him, the problem wasn't that I had grown, that I had succeeded, but that he and my mother had lost control of the story about me. I drew a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. All these years, have you ever asked how I was living? Have you ever cared about what I needed? Or did you only ask how Chloe's piano practice was going, how her performances turned out? My mother frowned, ready to speak, but Chloe cut in first, her lips curved into a mocking smile. Just remember, the one who shines in this family is me. You're nothing but a show-off who got lucky. I turned to her, meeting her eyes directly. In that instant, I no longer felt like the younger sister trembling under her mockery. I spoke slowly, each word clear. No, Chloe. You only shine in the world of our parents, but I've built a world of my own. And in that world, you don't get to define who I am. The room seemed to sink into tension. My mother quickly cut in, her voice trembling with anger. Madison, don't be disrespectful. No matter what, we are still family. You must know how to protect your parents' honor. I turned to her, my gaze steady. I've protected your honor for 24 years by staying silent, by accepting comparisons, by enduring being forgotten. But in return, what have you given me besides scars? If honor mattered so much, you should have thought of that when you abandoned me on my graduation day. My father slammed his hand on the table, the sound making the glass of water on the counter tremble. You are ungrateful. After all these years of raising you, this is how you turn your back on us. I didn't flinch under his glare. I simply answered, calmly, I am not ungrateful. I am only refusing to keep living as a shadow. Raising a child is not an excuse to bury them for life. Chloe scoffed, her laugh sharp. Do you think you're better than me just because you have a house by the lake? Money doesn't make you the star of this family. You'll always be nothing but a shadow. I shook my head and smiled faintly. You're wrong. I no longer care about being the star of the family. I only need to be the star of my own life. The argument dragged on, words growing heavier, but my voice remained even no shouting, no tears. Instead, it was my parents and Chloe who gradually lost control, their voices cracking, their tempers spiraling. And I realized, for the first time in my life, the balance of power had shifted. They no longer had the ability to make me tremble. I had my own world now, while all they had left was anger and wounded pride. At last, I set my glass down and looked straight at them. From now on, I will live my life my way. I am still your daughter, and I will fulfill the duties of one. That means when you are sick, when you need care, I will be there. But beyond those basic obligations, I owe you nothing. I do not owe you silence, I do not owe you sacrifice, and I certainly do not owe you my life as a shadow so someone else can shine. How? My mother burst into tears, but there was no regret in them, only bitterness at no longer being able to impose her will on me. My father gripped her hand and pulled her toward the door, but before leaving he threw one last line over his shoulder. You will regret turning your back on this family. I stood still, watching their figures disappear down the hallway, and felt a strange calm settle inside me. Because I knew that this time, I was no longer trembling. I had drawn a boundary. And that boundary would never be erased. Chloe was the last to leave. She paused, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and contempt. Just wait, she whispered. You'll never beat me. I only answered with a small smile, no words, because deep down, I already knew, I didn't need to beat Chloe. I only needed to beat myself, escape the shadow my family had draped over me for 24 years, and now I had. After that tense confrontation, my small apartment sank into silence. I sat on the sofa, staring at the door that had just slammed shut behind my parents and Chloe. A storm of emotions swirled inside me: sadness, disappointment, but also a strange sense of relief. I suddenly realized that for 24 years, I had lived in desperate pursuit of my parents' recognition. I had studied relentlessly, worked twice, 3 times as hard as others, all in exchange for a single, simple sentence. We are proud of you. But after tonight, I knew those words would never come. And the surprising part was, I no longer needed them to survive. I began to look back on my journey. The ones who had always seen me were not my parents or my relatives, but my professors who patiently guided me through 4 years of university, the friends who offered their shoulders when I felt abandoned, and the colleagues at the startup who trusted me with opportunities that changed my life. They never looked at me through the lens of comparison with Chloe. They saw me as I was a Madison with effort, passion, and my own worth. When I remembered the look in Professor Raymond's eyes during the lake house celebration, eyes filled with pride and trust, I understood that the recognition I needed was not from those who had denied me, but from those who truly valued me. The lake house at Lake Tahoe became the symbol of it all. It wasn't just a $3 million property, but proof that I could build a world of my own. Every time I stepped onto the wooden deck and looked out at the endless stretch of blue water, I felt deep within me that this was my new family. Not a family bound by blood, but one of choice friends who stood by me, colleagues who shared the same ideals, professors who never stopped encouraging me. These were the people I invited into that house, the ones who raised their glasses with mine, who laughed with me under the golden lights. In them, I found the sense of belonging I had long craved, the very thing my parents had never given me. I learned how to release my expectations. I no longer waited for my parents to change, no longer hoped for the day they would wake up and finally see me. Because the more I hoped, the more I hurt myself. Instead, I chose to let go. I set clear boundaries. I would fulfill the basic duties of a daughter when necessary, but beyond that, I would not sacrifice myself just to earn hollow recognition. And in that letting go, I discovered something I had never known before: freedom. Freedom to wake up each morning knowing that what I did was for me, not to please anyone else. Freedom to live in a house I loved, to walk by the lake without fear of comparison or judgment. Freedom to choose the people I wanted to keep close, instead of being forced into bonds that existed only by blood. The feeling was so liberating that I couldn't help but laugh out loud as I stood alone on the deck, the cool wind from the lake brushing against my face. I also came to realize something important. Love is not a reward for silence and sacrifice. I had stayed silent for too long, believing that if I endured enough, if I gave up enough, I would eventually be repaid with love. But the truth was the opposite. Only when I dared to say enough, when I stepped out of the shadow, did I finally find real love, the kind that comes from people who value me for who I am. In the days that followed, I began to build a new rhythm of life. I often invited friends to the lake house, hosting small gatherings filled with music and laughter. I dedicated more time to personal projects, developing my skills, seeking new opportunities in the tech industry. Every step now carried a different meaning. No longer a race for my parents' approval, but a journey to affirm myself, for myself. Sometimes, sadness still visited. Late at night, I would recall the emptiness I felt on graduation day, staring at the vacant seats. I still mourned the fact that my parents had never seen my worth. But instead of letting that sorrow consume me, I learned to hold it, to see it as part of my path. Because it was from that very sadness that I found the strength to step forward, to discover freedom, and to build a new kind of family. I look back on the journey I've walked, the birthdays without flowers or candles, the trophies left to gather dust on a shelf, the message that read, "Don't be upset," on my graduation day. I once thought those things would haunt me forever, that they would define my life. But now, as I gaze at the still waters of the lake, I realize they were only the opening chapters of a larger story. A story I have the right to continue writing in my own way. I want to tell you, those listening to this story, that every child deserves to be loved equally. No one is born to live as someone else's shadow. If you've ever been called ungrateful just because you dared to speak up, if you've ever been forced to step aside so that someone else could shine, remember this. Your worth is not determined by favoritism. It lies within you, in every step you take, every drop of sweat, every dream you dare to chase. Do not let favoritism define who you are. Family may turn their backs, they may ignore you, they may stay silent until you feel invisible. But that silence does not have to be the end. It can be the chance to rewrite your story. Turn the emptiness they leave behind into the stage where you stand. Build your own table and choose carefully who deserves a seat at it. I know it sounds easier said than done. I trembled the first time I dared to say no. I cried through long nights, believing I was unloved. But then I learned to breathe deeply, to step out of the dark room and open the door to let the light in. And when I did, I found something I had never known before. Peace. Peace in waking up without needing to prove anything. Peace in knowing I don't need my parents' approval to be myself. Peace in understanding that family is not only defined by blood, but also by love and respect. Thank you for listening, and I truly hope to see you again in the stories yet to come.